I'm going to be talking about my favorite tropes in fiction. So, in case you're not familiar with what a trope is often confused with a cliche. A cliche is basically a trope that has been overdone or overused into the point where it's been run into the ground so many times that you don't want to see it anymore. But a trope is something that's common in literature or movies or art in general, but it's still appreciated and it has new qualities to it that make it interesting when it's seen again. So, cliche bad, trope good. So today I'm going to be talking about my 6 favorite tropes in fiction. So just letting you know in advance, there is going to be a mild spoiler warning for these books and movies, just because I want to give some examples of when these tropes have been used effectively. So my first favorite trope is an antagonist that a reader can't help but feel for, or a protagonist that a reader can't help but root against. So I feel like in a lot of the weaker movies and books, the characters feel very shallow. It feels like the main character is only good and the bad guy is only bad, and there's no in between. But the gray areas in those characters are what make them interesting, what make them sometimes relatable, and more human-like as a whole. But that's not to say that if you're writing fantasy and your main villain is an ogre, that they should be super two-dimensional. There needs to be something that gives them a more realistic quality and just makes them more realistic, even if they are an ogre. One of the best examples of this where you can't help but feel for an antagonist, I think, is Gollum in Lord of the Rings. He is one of those characters where you know what he's doing is bad and his morals are all wrong, but you just feel bad for the poor guy. I mean, he had such a rough life, and there's been so much building up to the point where he meets Frodo and Sam, you can't help but feel for him. And vice versa, where there's a protagonist where you know that they're doing something bad but you can't help but vote for him, is Evan Hansen in the musical Dear Evan Hansen. Without going too much into it, basically this kid Evan gets wrapped up in this series of lies that starts very small but soon spirals out of control, and because of that he ends up hurting a lot of people. Great musical, by the way, you should definitely check it out. I'm definitely going to be coming out with a video talking more about theater within the next few weeks, so if you're a Dear Evan Hansen fan, let me know. Trope number 2 is when you have an intimate moment with a stone-faced character. You have this character and they're super, not mean necessarily, but they're just very closed off, separated from the rest of the group, and you have an opportunity where there's a moment where they show what they're really feeling and their true emotions on something. I feel like that moment can be so powerful. I just read one recently in a book that I was reading and I was just like, oh my gosh, like there's been so much build for this character and they still made the moment realistic. It's not like, oh, this character is super like stone-faced, super closed off, and then, oh, here's thrown in moment. When you build it properly so that that moment has the proper weight to it, just so good. Just so good. So a great example of this, I think, is Severus Snape in the Harry Potter series. He is super, again, closed off. He seems like he's separated from everyone. He's kind of mean, really nasty to Harry in particular. And then in the 7th book, you get this weight of this story behind his character, and it just flows so well, and I love it so much. My 3rd favorite trope isn't like a good trope, but it's when a low character gets knocked lower. You have a character and they're at the lowest they feel they could possibly be. They've been struggling, they still have a little bit of hope left, and then they just get knocked that final step down and they're just completely destroyed. I feel like in those moments, even though it's painful to watch characters that we've grown to know and to love in our own writing and in books, that really shows a character's true colors. When they get to that lowest low point, you really see what they're made of, or what they're not made of, and I really think you can learn a lot from a character in those situations, and I love it when you, it sounds so mean, but I love it when you see characters that are just completely destroyed, like everything they worked for is taken down, and you see how they react and how they push through or how they give up and how they get to where they need to be for the rest of the story to progress. I feel like there's so many ways you can take that and so many ways to do that that really tells a lot about your characters. A really great example of this is from The Martian. Mark Watney is stranded on Mars and he keeps pushing and pushing to try to make it home. And in the story, he is trying to go from the inside to the outside and the seal breaks in one of the pressure containers. I can't think of what it's called right now, but it gets blown out and all of his food is destroyed. And in the book, you have this really great moment where he is just sitting and his oxygen is leaking out and he doesn't know what to do and he's totally given up. And he just sits there and basically, I wouldn't say sulks, but just like absorbs his situation and just absorbs how bad a hand he was dealt. In the movie, there's this really great scene where he's in a rover and he gets in the rover, he's safe again, but he knows that he has to go tell everyone on Earth what happens, and he starts to type, and then he just has like a moment where he just breaks. And again, I feel so bad, but I love seeing characters when they're at their lowest. They feel like they're at their lowest and then life just knocks them a peg lower. And you really get to see what a character is made of. Number 4 I love, and this kind of goes hand in hand with that, is when a character has no hope. Hope is what keeps a character alive throughout a story, but when something happens and they get stuck in a situation and they feel like there's nothing left, that's when things get interesting. And it's interesting if a character pulls themselves out of the situation with no hope, if they accept that they have no hope, or if someone else is able to talk them out of it or to give them motivation to keep going. A family member, a friend, a loved one, a past loved one. There's so many ways you could do this. A really good example of this, I think, is in Toy Story 3 at the very end. You guys know what scene I'm talking about. They basically prepare themselves for death going into the incinerator. I'm still shook, and I don't even know how many years ago that was, but a very long time ago. I remember seeing that in the theater and being like viscerally distraught. Like, this was just something I had not only not seen before on screen, but seen before in a way that I could understand. Yeah, I remember my poor brother was like 8 at the time and he's like sobbing into my mom. It's like, cause it moved us in such a way that we had never felt before. And that scene is definitely like not a kid's scene, even though it's in a kid's movie. But that's just, I really think, a really, really great example of that, and seeing how instead of just freaking out, the characters come together and like decide to embrace the fact that there's no hope and that they've come to the end. It's a really beautiful moment. Number 5 is when a character gets what they want throughout the whole story and realize that it's not actually what they wanted in the first place. So again, this can be done in a variety of ways, but I love when a character goes through a whole story or a whole journey thinking that they want something, and then at the very end they get it, and they realize that that's not actually what they wanted. A lot of times it's like they've been pushing for this thing, but they realize they just wanted to be loved all along, and they realize that this person that they met along the journey is what they truly wanted all along. That's adorable and I love it. A really good example of this is in another Disney movie, Wreck-It Ralph. Ralph goes throughout the whole story thinking that he wants this medal, and once he gets this medal, he is alone in the penthouse that he's always grew up in, but all of his friends have left because along the way he's shut the game down. And seeing that realization where, oh my gosh, I've been working towards this for so long and it's not even what I really wanted. Another great moment that you can get with those characters. Number 6, which is one of my favorites, and this one you don't see a lot, but I think when it's done correctly, it can be really powerful. It's when a character has to give up their dream for the good of a group. When a character has cared about something so deeply and longed for something and worked towards something, but then they realize that it's either hurting others or it's going to mean that there's going to be consequences that he or she can't deal with, and they have to let it go for the betterment of society. I think that is so powerful, and it really, again, just another example of a way that you can show really good depth in your characters. A really great example of this is in the classic film Jurassic Park, where they're flying away from Jurassic Park, and John Hammond, who has been working for this park for so long and working towards it, and he realizes that it's just too dangerous. And I just, oh my gosh, that is just such a great, like, quiet moment with his character that, again, sadly you don't get in the book because he's dead. But it's a really good moment that I really appreciate Steven Spielberg putting into the movie. So that's all I have for you guys today. I really hope you enjoyed my different tropes, my favorite trope. Do you have any favorite tropes? I'd love to hear them, so leave me a comment down below and I'd love to read them. There are a bunch of different variety of genres of tropes and stuff, but I just figured I'd give you guys a good taste in some of my favorite tropes. Thank you guys for stopping by. Bye!